Meera Sinha was the perfect housewife, and Kabir Malhotra was just the boy next door, until their secret affair ignited a deadly obsession that shattered an entire family and left one man dead in his own car. Brentwood was a peaceful pocket of Los Angeles, lined with tall palm trees, neatly trimmed hedges, and quiet cul-de-sacs where neighbors knew each other by name but rarely by heart. On one such street lived Meera Sinha, a 39-year-old Indian housewife whose days passed in quiet routines. From the outside, her life seemed picture-perfect. Her husband, Ravi Sinha, a senior software engineer at a major tech firm, was well-respected and rarely seen at home during the day. Meera kept herself busy with yoga classes, book clubs, and the occasional garden party. She was known for her poise and elegance, always dressed in soft pastels and always smiling. No one suspected that behind her composed demeanor was a woman. Quietly unraveling, Meera's marriage to Ravi was built more on stability than love. It had been arranged back in India, and though they had grown accustomed to each other, there had never been a spark. Their conversations had dulled into functional exchanges. Their intimacy had faded years ago. Meera, lonely but dignified, accepted her life as it was. She had no children to fill the silence, only chores and long afternoons spent peering out. The window at the world moving on without her dot next door. The Malhotras had lived for just over 6 years. Anjali Malhotra, a kind-hearted nurse and widow, was Meera's closest friend in the neighborhood. She often came by for tea, bringing with her laughter, gossip, and lightness that Meera found comforting. But it was Anjali's son, Kabir, who slowly began to shift the stillness of Meera's world. Kabir was 21, handsome, athletic, and full of charm. He was attending UCLA and often came home during weekends or holidays. Meera had watched him grow from a quiet teen into a confident young man with striking features and an infectious smile. At first, their interactions were polite and casual smiles, exchanged over shared driveways, a friendly wave, occasional small talk. But over time, those small moments stretched into longer conversations. Kabir was curious about Meera's Indian cooking, her views on life, and her experiences adjusting to America. He would often stop by under the pretext of borrowing something or asking about an ingredient. Meera began to look forward to those knocks on the door, more than she wanted to admit. What began as innocent became increasingly intimate. Meera started dressing differently, wearing subtle makeup, combing her hair more carefully, and even listening to the music Kabir mentioned in their talks. Kabir, in turn, lingered longer in her kitchen, laughed harder at her jokes, and began touching her shoulder or hand a little more often, small gestures that crossed unspoken boundaries. They never acknowledged what was happening. It was as if both were moving in a fog, enjoying the thrill without daring to name it. Ravi remained oblivious, immersed in work and unaware of the shifting energy within his own home. Meera started inventing reasons to stay out longer, spending more time in the backyard when she knew Kabir would be outside. There were moments when the two would lock eyes and quickly look away, but those glances said more than words ever could. At night, Meera would lie beside her husband in bed, her heart still racing from the briefest touch of Kabir's hand that morning. The guilt gnawed at her, but it was dulled by the warmth of attention she hadn't felt in years. The neighborhood noticed changes, though no one said anything. A few raised eyebrows, a few hushed comments passed between neighbors. Anjali didn't suspect a thing. Why would she? Meera had been like a sister to her, a trusted friend she shared everything with. But behind closed doors, in quiet rooms, and stolen seconds, a forbidden connection was growing into something dangerous. It was only a matter of time before the walls of this quiet suburban world cracked, revealing the chaos brewing beneath. The affair between Meera and Kabir had crossed from subtle tension to undeniable reality. What once lingered in stolen glances and fleeting moments now lived in shadows real. consuming and entirely out of place in the sunlit calm of Brentwood. It started with one impulsive kiss on a quiet afternoon when Anjali was at work and Ravi was still at the office. Kabir had stopped by under the excuse of borrowing a phone charger. Meera had been cooking, and their conversation wandered from casual topics to memories of India, their sense of displacement, their loneliness. One second, Meera was wiping her hands on a towel, and the next, Kabir had closed the distance between them. She didn't resist. From that moment, they could no longer return to pretending. Their lives became a balancing act between discretion and desire. They were careful at first meeting only when the house was empty, keeping their voices low, avoiding any trace of their time together. Kabir would sometimes sneak in through the side gate when Meera texted that Ravi had left for a late-night office meeting. The thrill of danger, of breaking societal and moral lines, only deepened their attachment. Meera felt reborn, as if years of emotional neglect were dissolving in Kabir's attention. He made her feel seen, desirable, alive, but what felt like fantasy to Meera quickly became something more intense for Kabir. At 21, his emotions were volatile, immature, and absolute. He began imagining a future with Meera. He spoke about how love shouldn't be bound by age, how they could start a life together, how they didn't need to hide. Meera, though flattered, remained tethered to reality. She had a husband, a mortgage, a reputation. She saw the affair as fleeting, a hidden escape from a dull marriage, not a revolution. The more she tried to keep Kabir at a distance emotionally, the more possessive he became. Kabir's jealousy began surfacing in subtle but troubling ways. He started asking too many questions: where Meera went, who she spoke to, why she still acted like Ravi's wife in public. He grew frustrated whenever she avoided planning their next meeting. There were days when he would suddenly show up uninvited, texting her non-stop, demanding answers she couldn't give. Meera tried to calm him, reassure him, but his behavior was slipping from romantic to obsessive. Ravi, too, was beginning to notice small things at first: the slightly changed perfume, the late-night phone brightness, the missed calls. One weekend, he came home early from a canceled conference and found the back door unlocked. Meera, flustered, explained it away as a mistake. Ravi didn't argue, but he began paying closer attention. There was a shift in the air, a quiet unease that now lingered in every room. Anjali remained unaware, completely trusting of both her son and her friend. She often joked about how Kabir saw Meera as a second mother. The irony wasn't lost on Meera, whose guilt was becoming harder to suppress. She started withdrawing, trying to cut the affair off gently, but Kabir didn't want gentle. He wanted her, fully and forever. He began threatening to expose their relationship. He claimed he'd tell Ravi, show messages, even go public if she didn't commit to leaving her marriage. Meera panicked. The situation was spiraling out of control. What had started as passion was becoming a trap. Her entire life, her marriage, her friendships, her peace was hanging by a thread. She considered confiding in someone, maybe even ending everything and disappearing back to India. But she didn't. She still thought she could manage it, control it, untangle herself before things went too far. What she didn't realize was that Kabir had already crossed a line in his mind. For him, this wasn't just an affair anymore. It was war. If he couldn't have Meera, no one could. And in the silence between their final secret meetings, a dangerous plan had already begun to form. The silence following Meera's final attempt to break things off with Kabir was heavy, more threatening than any argument. She had told him it had to end, that what they were doing wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. Kabir didn't respond. Not then. He simply walked out of her house, his face unreadable, his eyes dark and hollow. Meera thought perhaps that was the end of it. Perhaps he had accepted it. But deep down, she feared the calm. She feared what Kabir might do when the fantasy shattered for good. Over the next week, Kabir didn't text. He didn't show up at her door. His silence was haunting. Meera tried to act normal, attending a neighborhood charity event, preparing dinner for Ravi, even watching a movie with him like they used to long ago. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. When she left the house, she often found herself scanning the street. At night, every creak in the floor made her heart race. Something had shifted, and though she couldn't see it, she could feel it creeping closer. Then came the day Ravi didn't come home. It was a Monday evening. Ravi had texted Meera earlier saying he had a late meeting with a client near Santa Monica. Meera went about her evening, cooked dinner, washed up, watched the clock. By 11 p.m., he still wasn't home. She called him twice. No answer. By midnight, she called again. Voicemail. Panic set in. She called the office, then a few colleagues. No one had seen him since late afternoon. The next morning, a police officer showed up at her doorstep. Ravi's body had been found inside his car, parked in a secluded area near Griffith Park. He was slumped over the wheel, his phone on the passenger seat, the car locked from the inside. At first glance, it looked like a heart attack. Meera, shaken and barely able to speak, listened as the officer gently explained that the cause of death was still being investigated. But initial signs pointed to a sudden collapse. The funeral happened quickly. Friends, colleagues, and neighbors gathered to offer their condolences. Anjali was by Meera's side the entire time, unaware of the true storm that had passed through her son's life and her best friend's marriage. Kabir didn't attend the service. He sent a text message to Meera the night before the funeral. "You said we couldn't be together. Now you're free." Meera's stomach turned. It was the first contact in over a week. She hadn't told anyone about the affair, not even the police. But that message struck like lightning. She now knew what she had only feared before. Ravi hadn't died by chance. 2 days later, the coroner's report confirmed her suspicions. There were traces of a rare plant-based neurotoxin in Ravi's bloodstream. It was not something naturally occurring or accidentally ingested. It was administered deliberately, likely in a drink or food. The police now considered Ravi's death suspicious. Detective Laura Jenkins, assigned to the case, began her work quietly. She started reviewing Ravi's contacts, financial activity, surveillance footage near the park. Meera, despite her fears, kept her composure. But she knew it was only a matter of time before her involvement with Kabir would come out. She tried to delete messages, erase call logs, wipe anything that could connect her to him, but it was already too late. Investigators pulled CCTV footage from a store near the scene where Ravi's car was found. A young man matching Kabir's description had been spotted loitering nearby on the night of the death. Another camera caught him purchasing a drink from a gas station minutes before the estimated time of death. Meera sat alone in her living room, holding her phone, staring at the message Kabir had sent. The grief over Ravi's death was now tangled with dread, guilt, and fear. The fantasy she had indulged in had collapsed into horror. Kabir hadn't just taken her husband's life, he had taken control of hers. The nightmare had only just begun. Detective Laura Jenkins was methodical. Nothing about Ravi Sinha's death felt random. The toxicology report confirmed the presence of aconitine, a highly toxic alkaloid found in the Munsood plant. It wasn't a common poison. It wasn't something that appeared by accident. Someone had administered it, likely in a drink or food. Someone had planned this. Ravi's phone records led nowhere unusual. His texts were mostly work-related. His banking activity showed a purchase at a local coffee shop hours before his death. But it was the camera footage around that cafe that revealed the first significant lead. A young man in a gray hoodie, standing in line behind Ravi, holding 2 drinks. The timestamp matched the time frame of the poisoning. That man was Kabir Malhotra. Detective Jenkins noted the footage and requested more data. They traced the receipt for the drinks, found fingerprints on the discarded cup in Ravi's car, and ran tests. A partial match came back. Kabir's prints were on the cup. Quietly, the police obtained a warrant to search Kabir's room in the Malhotra house. Meera had no idea the investigation had reached this point. She was still caught between grief and the growing horror that she may have played a role, however. Indirect in her husband's death. In Kabir's room, detectives found something chilling: a leather-bound notebook filled with letters written to Meera. Dozens of pages, many dated months before Ravi's death. Some of them were romantic, idealistic, filled with fantasies of running away together. But as they progressed, the tone changed. They became darker, obsessive, erratic. One entry read, "He doesn't deserve her. I'll set her free." Another, scribbled line, underlined twice, said, "Ravi dies. Meera becomes mine." The notebook also contained a printed email confirmation of an online order for aconitine seeds purchased under a fake name, but shipped to a P.O. box just a few miles away. The pieces were lining up. Detective Jenkins knew they couldn't afford to wait. They brought Kabir in for questioning. He was calm at first, even smug. He denied knowing anything about Ravi's death, denied ever being near Griffith Park. But when shown the notebook, his demeanor changed. His eyes darted around the room. He asked for a lawyer. It was clear he hadn't expected the police to connect the dots so quickly. Meera was called to the station the same day. Jenkins approached her gently but directly. She asked about her relationship with Kabir. At first, Meera denied everything. She stuck to the safe version of events: friendly neighbors, nothing more. But when Jenkins laid out the evidence, the notebook, the surveillance footage, the poisoned cup, Meera's face fell. She realized lying any further was futile. She confessed to the affair but maintained she had no knowledge of Kabir's plan to kill Ravi. Her voice trembled as she spoke. She described Kabir's possessiveness, his growing demands, his emotional volatility. She said she had tried to end it, had begged him to let go, but she hadn't gone to the police. She hadn't told Ravi. She hadn't even told Anjali. She had believed she could control it. Jenkins listened, watching Meera's every expression. She didn't arrest her, not yet. The evidence suggested Kabir acted alone, driven by his own obsession. But Meera's silence, her unwillingness to come forward earlier, had made her part of the tragedy. Whether knowingly or not, she had enabled the unraveling of a dangerous man. The neighborhood was in shock when news spread that Kabir Malhotra had been arrested for the murder of Ravi Sinha. Anjali collapsed in disbelief when detectives informed her. She had never suspected her son, never noticed the darkness growing inside him. She refused to speak to Meera again. Meera's world crumbled. Friends withdrew. The community whispered. She was no longer the graceful, smiling woman next door. She was the woman whose affair had ended in murder. Her house felt like a prison now, every corner haunted by Ravi's absence and Kabir's madness. What remained was silence, shame, and the undeniable truth. Secrets buried in suburban streets never stay hidden forever. The courtroom was tense, packed with reporters, onlookers, and those who had once lived quiet lives on the same suburban street where the tragedy unfolded. Kabir Malhotra sat motionless in the defendant's chair, no longer the bright, athletic young man neighbors remembered. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and his hands remained clenched in his lap throughout the proceedings. Meera Sinha was seated several rows back, away from the witness stand, her presence drawing as much attention as the accused. Though not charged, she was at the center of the story, the invisible thread tying the victim and the killer together. The prosecution laid out a precise, disturbing case. Kabir, obsessed with Meera, had grown increasingly unstable after she attempted to end their relationship. They revealed his internet search history, which included detailed inquiries into fast-acting poisons and untraceable toxins. The online order of aconitine seeds was traced directly to him. and footage from the P.O. Box facility confirmed his pickup. Surveillance video placed him at the coffee shop shortly before Ravi's death, and fingerprint analysis linked him to the poisoned drink. The notebook he kept, filled with disturbing fantasies and violent intent, was the final blow to his defense. The defense argued mental instability. They painted Kabir as a confused, emotionally vulnerable young man who had been manipulated by an older woman, led into a relationship he wasn't mature enough to handle. They claimed Meera's silence and emotional withdrawal pushed him to the edge, but the evidence was overwhelming. Intent had been documented. The act was premeditated. The victim was deceived, stalked, and murdered with cold calculation. Meera was called to testify. Her voice was low, sometimes trembling, as she recounted the affair, the warning signs, and the moment she realized Ravi had been murdered. The courtroom listened in silence as she described Kabir's escalating behavior, his anger, his jealousy, his threats. She admitted she had been afraid, but also ashamed. She had never imagined things would end in death. When asked why she hadn't come forward sooner, Meera broke down. She said she believed she could fix it quietly, that exposing the affair would ruin lives. But it had cost a life instead. The trial lasted 4 weeks. On the final day, Kabir was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge delivered a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Kabir showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He simply lowered his head, as if it had finally sunk in that his twisted idea of love had destroyed not just one life, but many. His mother, Anjali, was absent from the courtroom that day. She had moved to another city during the trial, severing all contact with Meera and declining to make any public statements. The aftermath was devastating. Meera's home became a ghost of its former self. She rarely left the house, and when she did, she wore sunglasses and moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. The neighbors kept their distance. Some blamed her outright. Others simply didn't know what to say. She sold the house 6 months later and vanished from Brentwood without a word. Her social media accounts were deleted. Her number changed. She left behind only whispers and unanswered questions. Detective Laura Jenkins closed the case, but remained unsettled. The story had started with a simple affair, something reckless but not uncommon. Yet it escalated into obsession, control, and murder. She had seen many tragic cases, but this one lingered. It was a reminder of how easily boundaries can blur, how secrets can metastasize in silence, and how love, when twisted by control and fantasy, can become fatal. Years later, the house where the Sinha family lived remained unsold for a long time. Potential buyers always paused when they heard the history. The flowers Meera once planted had withered. The windows remained shuttered. It stood there like a monument to a hidden life, a reminder that even the quietest homes can hold the loudest screams.